Hello everyone. Today I am going to talk about trauma responses in chronic illnesses with a specific focus on women with breast cancer in the Indian cultural context. Let us look at the experience of a woman diagnosed with breast cancer. This is what she said. From her account, we see that she reflects a lot of feelings of emotional distress, being upset, being confused, as well as positive aspects such as how she learned to appreciate life and developed a new perspective. Now I have a few questions for you. In what ways has the cancer experienced changed the woman? Is she only talking about negative and distressing aspects? Has she learned to appreciate her life and live each moment more meaningfully? What is the role of factors such as religion, culture, social support in her illness trajectory? The answer is yes, the experience of cancer has changed her in a more positive way. Though there is a mention of negative effects of the illness, she still has managed to find meaning and grow from her experience. Before we examine the various factors aiding her adjustment, let's understand a little more about chronic illnesses in general and cancer in particular. Chronic illnesses are considered to be traumatic because of the disruption they cause in the normal routine functioning of an individual. They usually pose a threat to the individual's survival and quality of life. The severity of the illness at the time of diagnosis and the chances of effective management of the illness will determine the extent of distress one goes through. Cancer is a life-threatening illness, but not necessarily a terminal illness. One of the reasons it causes a lot of fear in people is because it threatens one's life in ways that they may not be able to predict. This fear may be also triggered by popular advertisements such as warning against the ill effects of tobacco use or distressing images about cancer survivors trying to convey the importance of a healthy lifestyle. There is also a lot of uncertainty about when it can come back and whether the body will respond to treatment or not. The treatments involved in cancer, such as surgery, chemotherapy or radiation, have many distressing side effects. People may lose their hair, in fact in most cases even their eyebrows and eyelashes. That can really take a toll on the person. Even their sense of taste, the feeling of nausea, an inability to eat, being unable to rest, sense of fatigue, and then the post-surgery care, all these factors demand a lot from the individual. Dealing with cancer has its own challenges. For example, think of yourself suddenly receiving an unexpected news or something which you hadn't factored in as a possibility. We wouldn't know how to respond, so there's a lot of denial, a feeling of numbness at the time of diagnosis. Treatment may start very quickly, leaving the individual with hardly any time to comprehend what has happened. Financial and social issues also come into picture. Especially in India, a woman being diagnosed with breast cancer has a huge impact on her sense of self and also her roles in the family. There is a huge emphasis given on beauty and the qualities associated with being a woman, such as being a good wife, a good mother, taking care of the household, etc. This adds a lot of pressure if the woman is sick and cannot take care of the family. She suddenly becomes dependent on others. She may lose her value as a family member either because she cannot perform all her duties or because they reject her for being ill. Sometimes there are beliefs such as past life karma or being cursed or being punished for some wrongdoing because of which they are punished with an illness. If the woman is young and in her childbearing years, then she may be rejected for her inability to bear children as a result of hormone therapy or surgery. In some cases, the husband may not find the woman who has had a mastectomy or hysterectomy to be attractive anymore. He may desert her for another wife. And if the woman is an earning member of the family, the illness adds more burden in terms of finance or lack of social support. All these factors and many more can make the whole experience of cancer very traumatic. Specifically talking about mastectomy as one of the treatments for breast cancer, it can have a very lasting impact on the woman's sense of self, her self-esteem and body image. Many times they are not given the freedom to choose their treatment options and they may mourn the loss of their body part for a very long time to come. There are lots of accounts of how women feel mutilated during treatments such as mastectomy. For example, One woman I interacted with recalled how she felt like an automobile that had a vital spare part removed and it could not be replaced anymore, therefore making her feel like a useless machine. She was almost certain that her husband will now go to another woman. Such metaphors tell us about the impact of treatments like mastectomy and how a woman may derive her sense of self-worth based on how she plays various roles in the interpersonal context. The distress is not just stemming from the loss of one's own self, but a loss of what the perceptions of other people are according to her. A lot of their self-worth is derived as an acceptance in the form of interpersonal relationships. This is something that is strongly reflected in literature also, which talks about the impact of illnesses on our sense of self. Not just in breast cancer, it could be even something like head and neck cancer. It is a really disfiguring condition to be in. Or in colon cancer, they need to carry a bag for their excretory functions, and that can become very embarrassing or very uncomfortable for those who have to live with it. Other people may be put off by the sight or the smell of it. There are also many existential issues such as why this happened to me, what does my life mean to me now, what is my purpose, and what can I do from here, and things like that, which can also lead to a lot of distress. These concerns are crucial, especially in the post-treatment phase where we are trying to help them recover by regaining their strength, by regaining their health, and trying to get them back to normal. But now this normal is not the previous normal they had. It is a new normal which they might not have anticipated. Adjusting to this new normal self is critical in determining the impact of the illness, whether it is a positive impact or a negative impact. How often do you think of the possibility that you may not wake up the next morning? We don't, right? We always plan for the future. We don't really think of these kind of negative events, neither do we associate them with ourselves. So when unexpected and potentially life-threatening event occurs, it involves all these kind of issues and therefore becomes significantly traumatic for the person. Now, a lot of traumatic incidents might act as catalyst for growth, and people may find themselves completely reorganizing into a whole new person altogether, or just being a little more tolerant about something that comes up, or just being a little more grateful for the things that they had ignored earlier. This depends on how much help, how much support, and how resilient they may be to face the adversity and still learn from it. Positive adjustments to an illness depends on various factors. I have spoken to women as young as 28 years and as old as 72 to 73 years of age. The experiences are not the same, and therefore their traumatic responses are also not the same. Being a woman and having breast cancer and then mastectomy and hormone therapy, it can have a huge impact on their chances of having a baby or having a normal sexual life. If the person is young and wanting to have children or start a family, that's going to be much more devastating for her. Or if the husband and in-laws are very particular about the woman's appearance, then that can impact her in a much more deeper sense. There is a lot of stigma attached to having any serious illness, and in some cases they can even be isolated for fear of spreading infections. Commonly, these kind of issues, especially relating to sexual health, are not spoken about openly in India. So if you ask an older woman, she may say, anyway, our life is almost over and we don't really have an active sexual life. I've spoken to a lot of older women who have had grown-up children and then had breast cancer. Especially if they have a daughter, they may worry that their daughter won't find a prospective groom and she may be rejected in marriage because of the mother having been diagnosed and then passing on that genetic risk to her daughter. The stigma accompanying such illnesses are usually tied to how people make sense of the illness in different ways, such as this being something which you have got because of your sins in the past or what you did wrong to somebody and things like that. Under such circumstances, there will be a more negative impact on the survivor than any positive impact. Now let us examine some of the facilitating conditions in more detail. Are these two terms familiar to you? When we say recovery and resilience, the former may be understood in terms of getting better, in terms of healing from a wound or getting back to normal, whereas the latter term is understood as how well you can recover and the ability that might determine how well you are able to manage the impact of recovery, how much you are able to tolerate, how much you are able to withstand. Resilience would help you to bounce back. Recovery means that you have bounced back. But the concept that I am going to introduce you today is post-traumatic growth. And this concept seems to be something that goes beyond both recovery and resilience. Though you might be taking a step back, it is actually propelling you into becoming a stronger person with a better sense of self, a stronger identity, and someone who can integrate all these experiences to now face whatever happens in future. These positive adaptive changes are collectively termed as post-traumatic growth. It's a relatively recent concept coined by Tedeschi and Calhoun in 1990s. It is initially being studied and reported among war veterans and other groups that experience PTSD. Think of post-traumatic growth as being on the other end of the spectrum of PTSD. Now you might wonder how these two are related, and does that mean that anyone who experiences post-traumatic stress will also experience post-traumatic growth? Studies say PTSD and PTG may be related. Higher levels of distress will be correlated with higher levels of growth. There should be some amount of distress and disruption in order to make way for a reorganized sense of self and an experience of growth, but they don't necessarily happen at the same point in time. It depends on facilitative factors such as any kind of support in the form of relationships, religiosity or spirituality, etc. It can be facilitated in individuals regardless of their background or their gender or anything like that. It involves a lot of cognitive processing and engaging with the trauma itself. Now this sometimes happens in psychological therapies where you are given a space to narrate, to vent out and to reconstruct those meanings associated with trauma. Sometimes you talk to a person about a problem, you might not realize that you have actually been feeling this way. But when you are really reliving the whole experience, when you are narrating it, you might be surprised by the way in which you spoke about it or the way you emotionally responded while you were talking. Therefore, for a person to grow from a traumatic experience, it is important that they engage with the trauma itself, engage with the experience, and then try and reconstruct meaning of what it means to them, and that should help them integrate the whole thing. The pioneers of this concept have explained the process of it in the following manner. There is an assumptive world which we all have. Now this is the pre-trauma world, an existing understanding we have and we work with in our day-to-day lives. These assumptions are shattered if a life-threatening event is occurring, and then this will be accompanied by a lot of fear and uncertainty. The distress is more in terms of emotional distress, and there's a lot of confusion in terms of thoughts and cognitions. Cognitive processing of the event, that is how you think, how you talk about it, how you make sense of it, is very, very important when it comes to making sense, because it is found to be a significant predictor of growth. Now there are two things. We either deliberate on the same thing, or sometimes we tend to ignore and cut off from all those things by withdrawing and denying the possibility of it being true. We tend to chew on the same thought, that is, we ruminate. This rumination can be both intrusive and also reflective. So here's what makes the difference. We might have all these intrusive thoughts about what has happened and why it might have happened. It tends to intrude all of our functioning and everything that we do. But that can be made a little more reflective through some kind of facilitator. So it could be with the support of a therapist, it could be by reading, it could be through spiritual meanings or prayer, religion, or finding meaning in life because you want to live for someone else. It is this reflective rumination process that needs to be facilitated in follow-up care of cancer survivors. This will help them adapt more positively to their illness experience. There are other models which talk similarly about our assumptions and our life goals. If we look at existential theories, they would have a similar way of looking at how we make sense of our lives. But Taylor's theory seems to be more relevant in the context of cancer. And if you look at what she says, readjusting to life or successful coping would involve a search for meaning, an attempt to regain mastery over the event, and a self-evaluation. Similarly, Janoff Bullman's model also talks about integrating adaptive assumptions. So, all these theories speak in terms of cognitive processing as well as existential processes that are at work. How you navigate through what has happened in the past, what you will be in the future, while still being in the present is important. This transition is difficult. Some people may be able to do it easily, but some people might not. It may take years for them. For instance, I met a survivor who was diagnosed 2 years ago. This was the first time during my interview with her that she had spoken of her experience in so much detail. And she was so surprised at herself, at how she looked at the whole thing, and how even while she was talking about what she thought, she was okay with it, and she was actually getting very emotionally upset and worked up. Sometimes these realizations tend to happen much later on, but we can facilitate this by using supportive strategies. Let's discuss some experiences of women diagnosed with breast cancer. A lot of women said that now I just need to look out for the family. I need to do everything possible to be okay for them. Many also said, okay, so this was God's way of testing my faith or of strengthening my faith. Some people said, something I've done in the past, I have to repent for my sins now. So this is my way of cleansing myself. As you can see, cultural factors have a big impact here. So it depends on how we try and make sense of it and what comes out of this whole meaning making process. But we know it can be facilitated and can become adaptive. This can steer them towards a greater level of acceptance, of understanding, of integration, and by integration here I mean integration of the ill self, the previously healthy self, and now a new normal survivor self. We know that there is an emotional crisis when treatment ends and recovery begins. So this is a feasible time when we can interact with survivors to help them cope. Let's say in India, women are relatively more conservative about their bodies. So somebody who has breast cancer will have to go and expose themselves to the doctor, who are mostly male. Many ways they feel a sense of shame, a sense of being violated and things like that. They know that the doctor is just there for treating them and look at their body parts just as a part of the body having a tumor. But then it's a lot more than that for them. Just being a little sensitive to these needs or communicating to them, asking them politely to be ready for treatment or for a checkup would help in many ways. In fact, one survivor also mentioned that she would have preferred to have another survivor there along with her during the time of diagnosis and receiving treatment, as she would be able to relate with the survivor better than just the physician telling her that things would be all right. Another important factor is social support. In India, you won't have people walking in for a checkup alone. They usually are accompanied by a family member or sometimes the entire family. This says a lot about the interpersonal context and how it influences the experience of an individual. In some cases, the relatives may be more upset than the patient themselves. Sometimes the patient might not want the diagnosis to be disclosed to their relatives. Sometimes the relatives become overprotective and they don't want to tell the person that they have cancer. But actually, they have a right to know what has been the diagnosis, and this is what is going to happen to them, or these are the treatment options, which is more likely to be decided by others, and this sometimes distresses them even more. More so with women, because they have a lesser say in a larger family decision making process. It is mostly the men who take all the decisions. In many cases, women are not even self-sufficient or working and earning members, not on their own at all. However, this may play out very differently in the Western cultures. Spirituality and religion. These factors also seem to be more culturally rooted. And if you know this theory of karma, my past deeds, my past lives, my previous births, I might have done something wrong and now I'm repenting for this. So there was this another woman who believed she had breast cancer because she could not breastfeed her first child, and she feels that because she did this to her baby, it is probably a punishment for her. And now she has a tumor, she needs to deal with it as a form of repentance. It was her way of making sense, which is strongly rooted in cultural beliefs about motherhood or parents being a physical form of God to care for their children. In another example, there was a Catholic nun who had cancer, and she was saying how she could be a messenger, how she could reach out to other people who might be suffering and don't really have the means that she has, that is of spirituality and of faith. She's spiritually and religiously more stronger now, and she sees her experiences as an opportunity to reaffirm her faith and spread hope among others. And she might be able to use this experience to reach out to many more women who are suffering just like her. These views are very culturally embedded, so the notion surrounding why it might have happened or how they use religion and spirituality as an anchor to come out of their experiences is worth considering in follow-up care of survivors. Running support groups may be immensely helpful in letting women find that space to share and learn from one another. It will also diffuse the stigma that they are facing. However, it's important to consider cultural differences while delivering supportive care. Now, I would like to summarize my lecture today. We had discussed about the concept of post-traumatic growth and how it can be facilitated by meaning-making processes that can help the person reflect and rebuild their narratives. This will help them in integrating their pre-trauma and post-trauma sense of self. Many of these experiences are mediated by culture, as we saw instances of how the event is interpreted, how social notions about the causality of the event can determine one's trauma response, and how coping with the trauma also derives many strategies which are embedded in a socio-cultural space. I hope this information was useful in throwing light on some important areas that need to be addressed in the rehabilitation of cancer survivors. Thank you and have a good day.